Struggling to secure all your applications with modern identity services? You're not alone. But with identity orchestration, you can say goodbye to refactoring and complexity. Strata Identity helps you modernize app identity at scale while mitigating security risks and simplifying policy management. Maintain a consistent security posture and simplify policy management with identity orchestration. If you're ready to simplify your identity environment and improve your app security, share your IAM challenge with the Strata team to get a brand new set of earbuds. Just visit securityweekly.com/strata to learn more. That's securityweekly.com/strata. Imperva is the comprehensive digital security leader on a mission to help organizations protect their data and all paths to it. Only Imperva protects all digital experiences, from business logic to APIs, microservices, the data layer, and from vulnerable legacy environments to cloud-first organizations. With an integrated approach combining network, application, and data security, Imperva protects companies ranging from cloud-native startups to global multinationals with hybrid infrastructure. Start a free trial today and quickly protect your web applications at securityweekly.com/Imperva. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Ben Sadeghipour about offensive security, the importance of explaining the so what of vulns, and building content for communities. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, one announcement. As a member of the Security Weekly community, we are pleased to offer you 20% off your InfoSec World 2023 tickets. What year is this? Join a community of over 2,000 security professionals and innovators at InfoSec World on September 25th through 27th at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort. Experience world-class learning and networking through enlightening keynotes, informative panel discussions, interactive breakout sessions, hands-on workshops, and more. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSecWorld2023 using the code ISW23-SecWeek20. Mr. Kinsella, I don't actually have a AP I don't know question for us because we need to get a few more prompts from our listeners. So listeners, do please send us some questions that you'd like us to answer. I don't know that we can have a bounty for them, but maybe we can give you a t-shirt in true bug bounty style.
Worst case, I'm sure some of our listeners are playing with ChatGPT. Just go in there and have it come up with the questions to ask us.
Oh, that's a great point. Who knows what we're going to get? But yes, have some fun with ChatGPT. It's got to be worthwhile for something related to security. So let's do it that way. Other things. So let's get away from AI and go to agriculture. Trying to make a really bizarre segue there. But tractors, John Deere, and farming implements. They have tons of electronics in them. So Ben Nahamsek, who we just talked with in our interview segment, he hasn't jumped over too much into the hardware area, but if he ever does want to throw on a pair of overalls and get his hands dirty on some tractors, now he can do it a little bit more safely and help out owners in Colorado, who are able to hack on and reverse engineer and update and maintain, which is the important part, their own systems. And this is something that is it's an interesting aspect of AppSec because it's very human. It's very policy related rather than just the technical side, even though from Sick Codes, I have a link there to a lot of their work, who presented at DEF CON this year, also just hacking John Deere tractors, hacking a lot of these farming implements. Listeners, if you're curious about that, it's a little bit harder to perhaps to get your hands on one of these devices. But if you read through some of Sick Code's research, they went and found VIN number 1, which was a potato planter implement. And from there, it's the rest is history about all the fun they've been doing with the type of agricultural vehicles. So, John, I don't know if you got a tractor parked next to your Ferrari, if you got enough room in your garage, or what you've been doing recently. But anything on this topic that stands out for you?
This has been going on for so long. I want to say at least a decade.
Yeah.
Fight for the Future. All a bunch of different orgs have been pushing on John Deere in particular. A poor farmer out in the middle of the field or middle of, Colorado, any of these Midwest states in the U.S. where it's like, there's not a dealership like anywhere nearby. For these guys to be able to fix their stuff, it's sort of ridiculous. And yeah, for those of us like at home who like to either fix our iPhones or computers or whatever else, I see, Apple comes to mind. I see their point of view of being able to make sure that like a camera module in the phone is authentic, so there's still quality of the image and all that type of thing. But it's even just on the fix side, and the thing about that is frequently for us to figure out how to fix something, we have to hack it to some degree, right? It could be a software thing, it could be a hardware thing. So it's something I believe in quite strongly. Of like, if I own something, I should be able to. I've paid money to buy this thing, right? It's not like I know a lot of cars now are moving towards subscriptions in the car. We're probably not going to talk about directly, but what is it? GM, I believe, came out with they've announced they're not going to have either CarPlay or Android Auto in some of their new vehicles. And it sounds like they're doing this so that they can actually have their own infotainment system and charge a subscription for it. And it's like, I bought this thing. I want to be able to work on it. So I'm glad to see there's change happening. Hopefully we see more quicker.
Indeed. Hopefully we see more quicker. And there's perhaps a loose or maybe not so loose tie into the bug bounty space, or maybe more generally vulnerability disclosure, just in that sense of relationship between researcher, hacking community, and these organizations, companies producing hardware, software, and how much can be the right to repair, as you were mentioning. One of the reasons that hackers are picking apart John Deere tractors and other farming implements is that they don't necessarily have secure by design. But CISA has come out with I think, honestly, CISA and friends, to be fair, a guide on security by design. And the only reason, or the primary reason I had to do this, is that they also saw secure by default. To quote, a secure configuration should be the default baseline, which implies, in my words, no more hardening guides. If a hardening guide is beyond 2 pages of a PDF, it's not a secure default configuration. At least that's what I'm going to state here. There's a lot more interesting things in this document besides that one sentence. Not sure, John, how much you've had a chance to look at this, or how optimistic do you feel that we'll have secure by design coming out soon? Good sigh.
I like that they put this out. I know, sigh, I'm starting with never a good sign. And yeah, there's a lot of friends, man. The front page on the PDF, 1, 2, 3. Well, half of them are US logos, GovOrgs, but they've got a lot of friends on this for sure. I didn't see any authors, so I don't know who actually wrote it. But yeah, it's good. I've read over it. I think there was one thing here that really caught my interest on the secure by design. They start talking about CVE complete. Yeah, CVE completeness. It's like, I guess it's good to think about that when you're, and I'm thinking about designing the software originally, not designing a fix, which is probably what they're thinking of. There's good stuff in it. It's definitely worth the read. It's definitely. I sort of want to take a step back from it. I know I can't do it for the show, but I sort of want to take a step back and sort of let it sit in the head and go next time I'm actually designing something from scratch, bring this into and go, okay, is this helping me or no? So maybe if our listeners if they use this as they go through that process, hell, it might even be fun to have someone on and actually talk about what does it actually look like in IRL, as we kids say. But yeah, and it's interesting because this isn't the only one. We had I found one also this week. FDA will refuse new medical devices for cybersecurity reasons starting in October. And that for those outside, that's the Food and Drug Administration in the US. And what this matters is for healthcare devices, right? So it's not, the headline's a little misleading. What they're actually doing, what I read off of this, is they want new devices to have a cybersecurity plan. So if you have a device coming out to market, at the end of the day, are you going to have security disclosures and vulnerability disclosures, and do you have a way to patch is what they're really looking for, which that sort of makes sense if that's something that your life's going to be depending upon. So it is, we're seeing more of this coming from these government organizations. Are we going to see them actually, oh no, it's a stupid question, John, come on. I was going to ask, are we going to see them actually come together and have like a solid, unified message? And no, they're going to be, all these different ones we have to juggle and keep track of. And hopefully they're relatively similar to each other, so it's not too much juggling.
Indeed. Hopefully they are. And the guide too does, and this I think applies to the FDA as well. It does give the nod to use a memory safe language. That's unsurprising. And it also says, use a web template framework. It's basically saying, like a React or the similar to get rid of cross-site scripting. It also goes very specific with a bullet of parameterized queries. So it's still an interesting mix of broad high-level recommendations versus very tactical ones. But it does also talk about, rather than just the design of the code itself, for example, it does explicitly call out vulnerability disclosure programs. So it's giving that nod to what the FDA is looking for as well. So as you say, we'll see how many different of these come out. But the reason we're doing this is because we want to see fewer vulnerabilities. And one of the vulnerabilities that, speaking of government orgs, I threw in with a label called myth as a bit of a nod to our friend Adrian, who was talking about myths in InfoSec. So the article here is the headline, FBI warns of public juice jacking charging stations that steal your data. Basically, you plug in the USB port to charge your phone, and suddenly it becomes a 1990s era hacking movie, and Sandra Bullock is running away from ATMs from everything that's going bad. No. I threw myth on here because it's one of those things that it doesn't seem helpful to lead with fear in this day and age. And especially, I think, at least I included a link to iPhones that have and now I just forgot what their term was, restricted mode. So they don't have data access. Now, I'm not saying this is the 100% guarantee that you're defended against all types of threat models, but I think the general threat model, plug in, charge at an airport, because if an airport charging station is delivering malware, I'm pretty sure someone, some executive's IR team is going to find that malware, figure out where it's coming from, and things are going to get shut down pretty quickly. That's the aspect. The so what? Let me throw that in there. We have to use Nahamsek's so what comment here. So
this one, man, I saw this from I saw so many copies of this article last week. The best one, or the most recent one I saw over the weekend was, it was one of the more clickbaity type websites. Can't remember what it was, but it got in my news feed. And they were saying, the headline was, this travel life hack might actually endanger you, or something like that. I'm like, wow. That got me to click it. I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh no, you think a life hack is plugging USB cable into a TV to charge your phone? Oh, go away. So what's interesting about this is, do you know the backstory on this?
No,
where this
came
from? So the FBI did post on this, but it was like 10 years ago. So I believe it might be Colorado, I forget the exact state, but some state one of the FBI branches branch offices wanted to sort of, have something in their content stream. So they put this back out again. It's completely a non-story, but it got picked up so much in the last week. There's everything I've seen, there's no real large scale thing you can point to of anyone ever doing an attack this way.
Right.
Sure, there's probably going to be one-offs. And yes, we love to talk about when we're doing pen tests, we leave the USB thing in the parking lot for someone to pick up. But I've got, as they're called, data condoms, the USB things that separate data. I've got those somewhere. I haven't used those in years. And we all have batteries, most of us nowadays. So yeah, we might charge at an airport or something, but it's totally a non-deal. And we've talked about too much, so I can go to shut up. Let's go somewhere else. I'm cutting myself off for once. Something caught your eye. CloudSec has a new talk or a new conference coming up.
Yes, so Forward CloudSec. We've covered a few of their presentations over the past years, and their CFP ends this month. So if you're interested and you have something new and interesting, or you're not sure what to submit to something like Forward CloudSec, their CFP page actually is really well written because it gives you hints on what they're interested in, as well as what they don't want to see. And it's clear, it's actionable. And it's sort of along the lines of what interests us, what's something that people can take action on, that people respond to, rather than just necessarily a generic, this is what a IAM is, so to speak. So it's similar in what Ben was describing about what he likes to see for NahamCon. So I like this, just want to call attention to the CFP. They're also encouraging diverse and first-time speakers. So it's also nice to see them giving explicit support for that and help for first-time speakers. So Friday, April 28th, get it in before midnight Pacific time. And we will be covering those in mid-June, is when it will be in Anaheim and virtual. We'll be covering some of those fun presentations that come across our radar.
Helps if I unmute. That is one of the better CFP pages I've seen. Yeah, I'm going to, shut myself up and be positive little mumpkin today.
All right, well, let's see. We'll keep things positive. So here's the fun. So we did mention AI at the top. Adversarial AI. This is the Glaze project out of a university that is University of Chicago. That is pretty cool because it's essentially trying to tell artists, here's how you can perturb your image in a way that to humans, it still pretty much looks like the exact original image. Now, your mileage may vary, so to speak, just because of some visual artifacts. But the point is that humans are pretty good at saying, this is a pretty picture. I like this artwork. That's wonderful. But AI training models can easily get confused and say, this is a panda, this is a banana, this is random noise, and basically other things. So it's a fun AppSec angle because AppSec is about offensive security. A lot of it is. That's what Ben was telling us about. There's building secure software isn't so much about defending yourself against bugs that humans introduce. It's defending your workflows and your designs from humans that are abusing it or misusing it in clever ways. And I think this type of Glaze project adversarial artwork possibly is maybe similar in spirit to people who want to maintain their tractors. This is a case where maybe people want to maintain their ownership, their copyright, or prevent it from being used by AI training models. So I'm not sure that I stretch too much. Let me shut up for a moment and see what John thinks about this.
It's a shut up podcast. I don't know. I think you might have, at least for me, I think you might have stretched too much.
Okay.
And the reason I'm saying, I saw this article, those ones we both saw last week. With AppSec, you are you're finding a weakness in software, you need to fix it. Mm-hmm. I think with this AI, so the thought I have with this AI, I'll back up and see if I can walk into this. Glaze project is really interesting. My expectation is the AI is going to keep getting better, so that the techniques which are being used today will not work in, hell, the stuff's moving fast, let's say a year. So it's almost reverse, right? I think the AppSec here is the Glaze project, and the AI is going to keep finding weaknesses in it, not the other way around. So yeah, and I think it's the same thing. There's privacy folks that are talking about how you modify your face so you're not recognized also on cameras. It's going to be really interesting to see how this goes. It's interesting. Well, yeah, we both saw this. I'm curious to see where it is in 6 months. There's some other stuff that I've got a growing list of these things which I actually do check to see how they're going on. The Rust port I was looking at last week of, what was it, Webfish or something? But yeah, I'll add this one to my list and we can come back and have an end of year chat about it.
We should, and we'll make sure that on your list is the anti-AI face recognition makeup, as you mentioned. There's also haute couture or punk couture that's also defensive against facial recognition, if I can speak today. Before I shut up, let me turn us again to another security by design. So here is a theme along with that CISA and Friends paper, deploying key transparency at WhatsApp. Now, here's something that we probably will come back to when they publish more technical details. But I thought what struck me about this was it's nice to see WhatsApp still focusing on security engineering. And they're highlighting an aspect that is, hey, yes, they solved this problem. You can check QR codes. You can do all these manual workarounds to make sure using a tool, using a secure messaging like WhatsApp or Signal or any of those others. Say, am I talking to the right private key? Am I talking to the right identity, or has there been a whisper identity or a ghost identity been added to our conversation? What WhatsApp has done is try to address that threat model, but rather than putting a lot of burden or too much burden on the end user to go and inspect, here are all the keys, and now read all 2048 bits of them to make sure that all the ones and zeros in the right order, and this is who actually John Kinsella is versus Mike Shima, who's just sneaking into this conversation to talk about synthwave music. They're looking at this from a key transparency, which is more user-friendly. It's not necessarily something that everybody can use immediately or even can understand. But if they need to, you now have a history of keys that were part of a conversation. It's very easy to go back and say, was there someone eavesdropping on this? And it's more detectable. So I think that's what stood out to me in terms of positive security engineering that's actually putting less burden on the user or trying to address what the problems that the user have.
Yeah. It's neat. I'd love to see other folks adopt this. The one that sort of really solidified it for me, the got a section here, was a problem that key transparency is fixing. And the third option, they talk through the actual scale of this. So if you have a group of 100 people on WhatsApp, and there's people joining or leaving or changing devices and all this, every time you have to go through and check all these keys, for 100 folks, there's 4,950 pairs of security verifications you need to do. Best of luck. So that's what really sort of drove it home. I mean, I know on Signal we get like if someone changes their app or something, you get like their security number has changed, and you're like, okay, is that really you? But at this type of scale, yeah, that's it's interesting, right? It's I think we think of it more for human-to-human communication.
Yeah.
But how does this affect as we're using more APIs and more, we talk about API security and supply chain. So I think this is sort of, there's other use cases for that out there. I'm not just saying supply chain for health. I think it's like, if we start thinking about how do we validate where a project is coming from and if it's a legitimate release and things like that. And it's, as that goes upstream as well, I think that that can be used in other places as well.
You said legitimate release. So that means we have to talk about supply chains, John. Oh, no. There's a new, from Google, Deps.dev, a new API that can basically give some metadata or some data about dependencies. Now, I think this is good. I'm still wrapping my head around who the consumer of this is and how it's going to fit within the ecosystem. I think for me so far, if I'm reading through bullet points today, if that is our other theme, there's an API in action, and am I affected? Which actually also sounds like, so what? I can see this being useful for the next Log4j or the next, this is the whatever package has been compromised or backdoored or otherwise subverted. And you want to figure out, where does this exist within my ecosystem? I think being able to crawl a graph database like this could be informative, should be informative. It does speak to that asset inventory, and here the asset inventory of packages. So I see that's speaking to me. I still think it's great work, but I still don't know who the audience is and how it's going to be used.
It feels like the beginning. I like that they have the fact they have an API in there. They're sort of thinking about, can you plug this into VS Code or something? I think that's where they're probably thinking about going. Google doesn't have their own IT, do they? Not that I know of. Yeah, so it's what I like about this is there's folks, we're moving now from the beginning here where there was like a little bit of head scratching going on in words and essays, that now we're actually seeing like projects start to come together. So I think, okay, cool. And as we start to play with these and work on them more, we're going to understand, as you said, like who is, not who should be the user, but who is the user, who's actually going to use this. Is it us, the security nerds, or will we get developers in there and they'll have interest, but will they come back to it time after time, or is it like a one-time, hey, that's a neat toy? So yeah, it's. I think the other theme of this episode is let's come back to it in 6 months. But
I think you're right.
Yeah, we'll have to see this.
Yes, and to be clear, it is wonderful that Salsa came out with a list of items that are important, but as we're seeing with Deps.dev and other of these .dev domain projects, there's actually execution and meat behind it. So that is what we're looking forward to in 6 months. And another thing that we're going to have to revisit in 6 months, John, I had to just squeeze this in because the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission wants to make space vehicles, space implements, critical infrastructure. So I can't wait to see more space hacking.
Yeah, we've talked about this a few times over the last year or two, security and satellites and stuff like that. I didn't see who wrote this one. U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Wow, names. I was curious to see if this was being done by the Space Force. I still can't say that with a straight face. But yeah, right. There's a lot of things we got flying over our heads. I mean, there's the part that's scary to me actually is you've got 3 large companies now that are all wanting to launch satellite internet that's low geosync orbit. There's more and more stuff over our head, and I'm not saying it's going to fall down, but there's I think we're talking high hundreds, if not thousands now, of satellites in low Earth orbit, plus all the weaponry, plus the communication system. So yeah, I get it. If something goes wrong up there, it's not easy. It's not like you can go into the server room and just reboot something. So yeah, it's. I didn't look at the details of this yet, but I'm curious to sort of see. This at least in my mind should have a higher bar for security. I haven't mentioned in a long time, but I always talk about the they do the right thing. Or what's that called? Damn, I haven't talked about it for a while. There's an article in Fortune that talked about how they did code modifications for space shuttle code systems, and it's like they really cared and were careful about it. And I suspect we're not having that same level now. So maybe this is overdue.
Maybe it's overdue. And you added much more insight than I did, because I just wanted to say, I hope when we start seeing the DEF CON, Black Hat, other conferences, just avoid the easy puns of like Final Frontier and in space, no one can hear you scream. I appreciate the references, but let's have some creativity in the presentation titles. John, you also mentioned VS Code. Let's talk about a couple tools. Security notes. You wanna do some documentation? Is this did I understand correctly?
Oh, I know. I'm one of those guys that likes documentation. And where documentation is really handy is when you're doing code reviews. So I found this tool in the last week or so. It was, in Disclosure, it was mentioned in another mailing list, I think, and I can't remember where I found it. I just had it in a tab. But I used to use a separate tool in VS Code that was always a little hacky. Can't remember what it's called. I looked in my VS Code. It's not installed anymore because it wasn't that great. But like for me, when I'm going through code, either my own in-house code, whatever company I'm working for, or as a consultant when I'm doing this for someone else, I really like if I keep my notes in a separate file, on like line 35 in this file and blah 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 blah. But with a modern code editor, if I can actually put a bookmark in there or like actually tag the code right where it is. And so that's what VS Code Security Notes does. This came from Refactor Security. It works quite nice for me one-on-one. I've been using it for the last week or so. What I haven't done with it yet, they have a mode where it can do work with other folks. So you can hook it up to, I think it's a Rethink database, and then share your notes. And that sounds amazing. I'd love to see how that works. But yeah, it's you don't want to, you're reviewing codes. Sometimes I'll put like a comment in the code like, hey, this is secure, we need to fix this. But often you don't want to modify the code or check something in a Git or whatever else, or have a document trail left behind that way. But being able to use this tool to put something in there and let me say, hey, I want to come back and look at this next week, or think about what happens with a large value, or is this XSS, or how are they filtering, or a lot of sort of common comments. And you don't want to open a trouble ticket yet. So for me, it really scratches an itch. So yeah, that's my tool for the week.
Yeah, and as you said, the collaboration part is great, because this can also be just a way to track there's a code smell here, or this like, are we secure, was as a great way of phrasing it, because you can also track that over time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the comments within the code, because a lot of times those comments, I think, are extraneous to explaining what the code does. So that would be some of my thinking of just why you would keep this sort of in parallel. But also there are some references to a couple good security tools in that the VS Code checking, Chekhov for your Terraform, GhostX, SemGrep, Brakeman for all you Ruby folks out there. I just grabbed a Android penetration testing cheat sheet. This seems like something useful to any bug bounty researchers out there. Just wants to start building up a list of tools and techniques for reverse engineering and inspecting Android APKs, Android apps. And there's also Debug Hunter, was just another Chrome extension, which I thought was pretty interesting because that's the type of thing that if you're a bug bounty researcher, you just might enable and just go about your normal day, interact with a bunch of different websites and just see, does it highlight something? Does something start to look hinky? And then you can go and start poking around. And and that's where, Ben didn't talk too much about this, but that's what I really like about offensive security is the creative thinking of pulling apart, seeing something and then pulling that thread and finding that vulnerability, ideally finding that vulnerability. And then if you are lucky and there's a bounty program, even getting paid for it. So a couple tools that I thought were fun.
So what I like about the checklists, we talk about top 10 and whether we like that or not. The thing about the checklist for me is very seldom, very seldom, I don't think I've ever just taken like someone's checklist and said, this is how I'm going to test this application. But what I will do with them is I'll take pieces off other checklists and I'll put them into mine. So I've got my own checklist of like how I like to do things. It's sort of the same thing as Ben, right? How he likes to go and the tools he likes to use. So that's what's interesting about them to me. It's not so much, let me bookmark this and next time I'm pen testing an Android app, come back and use the list. But that's sort of loud. But to be able to figure out what to do with it and add it into mine.
And I think while the tractors are coming for John, what I'll add there too is that one of the things Ben said, he also likes to do things manually or do them on his own rather than just always only ever using the tool. And I think that kind of speaks to what you were describing there in the sense that I like that from an educational perspective so that you're not just rote following step 1, step 2, step 3, like a ChatGPT might, that you're actually applying it, understanding some of the foundation of it, and then modifying it yourself. So you hopefully will then find that other vulnerability that someone else didn't think of, or find that vuln that's not clearly called out within the checklist. And that means you'll get the benefit for it. So John, any final words before the tractors come to shut you down?
I can barely hear myself think right now.
Okay. Well, that sounds like it's time that we should wrap things up. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you very much, John. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of computers, check out Cursors by Makeup and Vanity Set. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.